3%. The Northern Cape, for obvious reasons, it's
But the
sparsely
city
populated.
of Cape Town seems to be,
Well, obviously, the metros, the 8 metros will be the last ones because they are the densified urban centers. So I think once the metro votes come in later this evening, we'll have a much, much clearer picture.
Okay, so just looking at the party vote share, Professor Kotza, as I mentioned earlier on, a difference of 10% in terms of the number of registered voters, women to men. Is there a way of telling how they voted in the past? I actually was trying to find out which province has the highest number of women in terms of the population, and I can't find that. We do know that Gauteng has the highest number of people in a province, followed by KwaZulu-Natal. So I would imagine that logic would then say that's where you'd find the largest number of women in a province.
I would think so, but I think, normally we have the stats in front of us, but because it's been so pressurized, I think it's KZN, for obvious reason, the rural vote as well. So I'm thinking it's KZN, but we will verify that data with you later on.
Professor Kotza, what is your thoughts on how women influence the vote sharing?
Well, first of all, we know they are the majority of the voters now. What we don't know is, first of all, how many of them actually voted, because these are the registered voters.
Yes.
And I think what is important is possibly the households where woman is the single parent. That's a very important component, and I guess a lot of them are in the more urban township areas. And then women who are in households where the men are migrant workers, where, for example, from KwaZulu-Natal, where many of the men are working close to Johannesburg or in the mines or some other places, or well, it's not so much South African households, but those coming from Lesotho who's working on the gold fields in the Free State. And then also many persons who are coming from the north, from Limpopo, for example, Limpopo province, and working in Gauteng. We know also, for example, in KwaNdebele, where a lot of people are migrating on a daily basis between KwaNdebele and Tshwane or Pretoria. So the demographics of this is very fluid, it's very flexible, and therefore it's going to be quite difficult to determine exactly which parties are benefiting from the women's vote compared to other parties. We've seen that some parties are accused of being almost too much male-dominated. I mean, that has been referred to, for example, the EFF has been accused, and they said that they are taking steps in order to get more female support.
And I was just looking, and we'll look at the national picture in just a moment, to see some sort of movement for the Women Forward party, because it was quintessentially the one party that really spoke very strongly about the empowerment of women. So just looking at the population group, I just did try and pick up those figures. So in the last elections, just in terms of the population, the number of female voters, it seems, was at 52%. So it's very it's very difficult to tell. I'd imagine that it's almost like a half-on-half sort of situation.
Yeah, that sounds about correct. The registered voter population in South Africa for these elections were 45% male and 55% female. Like the professor was talking about the EFF as well. The EFF conceded, the CIC, the Commander-in-Chief Julius Malema, even conceded that they need to do more to draw in that female vote. And they knew from the start that most of the youth that they were actually communicating to were not registered. Plus, they had the issue of the female vote and not appealing to that segment of the voters' roll. So they kind of anticipated that they will do well, but not as well as they wanted to do in these elections.
So breaking down at those figures, again, I'm going back to the figures from the last election, 2014. So we had over 2.8 million, 2,875,843 household. And I'm just looking at the breakdown there. I was hoping to see so they've got it by gender. So you have a predominantly male headed household in KwaZulu-Natal. But what does it tell us about women's issues? As we said, if we're in a largely patriarchal system, and most of these political parties, as much as some have been accused of paying lip service, especially to issues that really affect women and their feminist policies, is it showing in past results how women are affected by the governments that lead them? And I'm talking about the parties that are voted in.
I don't think so, and I think it's going to be very difficult for us, as commentators to even pick up how women voted in the past. But you are very right to say, if you look at the political landscape nowadays, I think one party actually stands out in terms of women empowerment, commitment towards gender equality, and that's the ANC.
All right. Hold the thought, Rinesh, because Simpiwe Ngongwani, our colleague down there on the floor of the Results Operations Center, is going to speak to one of the political party members, and I suppose that will also make a showing just in terms of what their considerations are, what are they pushing for in their policies. Simpiwe?
All right, Sapi, so before I speak to